The Clearing of the Highlands, a tale of displacement and resilience. This narrative is proudly brought to you by Polly Speaks For You. At Polly Speaks For You, we believe in empowering individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, through cutting-edge text-to-speech and voice recognition technology. Polly Speaks For You isn't just software. It's a voice that helps individuals express themselves, connect with the world, and unleash their creativity. The Highland Clearances were more than just an event in Scottish history. They were a profound shift in the lives of an entire people. A forced migration, an erasure of centuries-old communities, and the reshaping of Scotland's social and economic landscape. The clearances left an indelible mark on the Scottish Highlands. The echoes of this era, full of hardship and resilience, are still heard today, as descendants of those displaced struggle to reclaim their heritage and remember the history of their ancestors. The roots of the clearances, a changing economy. The Highland Clearances did not come about suddenly. They were the result of a complex web of political, social, and economic changes that began long before the first families were forcibly removed from their land. The 18th century saw the rise of the British Empire, with economic interests shifting from the traditional feudal and agricultural systems to a capitalist model centered on large-scale sheep farming and industrialization. The clan system, which had defined Highland life for centuries, began to weaken during this time. The traditional Highland clans were ruled by chiefs, many of whom held vast estates that were worked by tenant farmers. The Highland people lived in small communities that grew food, raised livestock, and shared resources. But as the British government imposed greater control over the region, it became clear that the old ways of life were no longer sustainable in the eyes of the landlords. The transformation of the Highlands into sheep grazing lands, seen by many landlords as a profitable venture, meant that the traditional tenant farmers, who had lived and worked on the land for generations, were suddenly seen as surplus laborers. The fertile, green hills of the Highlands were ideal for sheep farming, and sheep provided a lucrative return, especially in the growing textile industry. Landlords, eager to increase their profits, began to evict tenants, destroy homes, and burn entire villages to make room for their herds. The impact of the clearances on Highland communities. The arrival of the clearances in the Highlands was not just a matter of economic shift. It was a cultural and emotional upheaval. The Highlanders' attachment to the land was deep-rooted in their identity, history, and spirituality. The land had been passed down through generations, and the old Gaelic culture was deeply tied to the land, as it provided sustenance, shelter, and a sense of belonging. With the forced evictions, families were uprooted, families torn apart, and communities scattered. A powerful reflection of this emotional turmoil is found in a letter written by a Highland woman named Margaret MacLeod, who, having been forced to leave her home, described the heartbreak of watching her village destroyed. When I left our croft, I looked back one last time. I could see the smoke rising from the ashes of our home, and my heart felt as if it had been torn from my chest. It wasn't just a building that had been taken from me. It was the spirit of our family, the memories of my childhood, the life we had built together. The land I walked on was part of me, and now I had nothing. Margaret's words capture a universal sense of loss that many Highland families felt. The very foundation of their lives, home, family, community, was being ripped away. The physical displacement was a form of cultural displacement as well. The clearances left not just empty homes, but shattered lives, disbanded clans, and lost traditions. The forced migration, a journey of survival. With nowhere to go, the displaced Highlanders often had to choose between emigration or destitution. In the early stages, many were sent to the coastal towns and cities, where they were forced into low-paying, dangerous work. But the British government's solution to the problem of displaced Highlanders was to encourage mass emigration, especially to colonies like Canada, Australia, and the United States. This was seen by the government as an opportunity to clear the land for profitable agricultural use while relieving overpopulation in the Highlands. Emigration, while offering a glimmer of hope for some, was not an easy solution. It came with its own set of trials. Families who had lived off the land for generations had little experience in the world beyond the Highlands. They faced dangerous, long ocean voyages, with many of the ships overcrowded and unsanitary. Disease was rampant, and many did not survive the journey. The lucky few who did arrive in foreign lands found themselves in a new world where everything was unfamiliar, and their traditional skills were often useless. The following entry from a diary written by Duncan Ross, a young man who emigrated to Canada after the clearances, reveals the harshness of the journey and the struggle to find a foothold in a new land. We sailed for what felt like an eternity. The sea was cruel, and many of us fell ill. We buried our dead at sea, and it seemed as though the very act of living had become a battle. When we finally reached Canada, the air was so cold it burned my lungs. The land was vast, but it was not the land of our fathers. We had no tools, no knowledge of how to farm here, but we had no choice. We worked the land as best we could, though the earth felt foreign beneath our feet. We were strangers in a new world, but we had to survive. Duncan's words emphasize not only the physical struggle of immigrants, but the psychological toll it took on them. Their identity, culture, and traditions were all tested as they adjusted to life in new countries. Memories of the clearances, a legacy of trauma and hope. Even in the face of tremendous hardship, the Highlanders' resilience is evident in the many stories that have survived the generations. One such story comes from Catherine Fraser, who was born in Nova Scotia, Canada, to parents who had fled the clearances in Scotland. Catherine remembered the tales her mother told of the old days in the Highlands. "My mother would sit by the fire and tell us of her life in Scotland, of the land they had once farmed, and of the village that was burned to the ground. But she didn't tell us in anger. She told us with sorrow, with love for the land that had been lost. And I remember her saying, 'We may have lost the land, but we will never lose our spirit.'" Catherine's mother, like many Highlanders, carried with her the weight of loss, but also the strength that came from surviving the clearances. The sense of loss was not one that was easily erased, but it was tempered by the drive to rebuild, to maintain a sense of dignity, and to honor the memory of those who had been displaced. The cultural revival. In the years since the Highland clearances, there has been a resurgence in interest in the history and culture of the Highlands. Today, the Gaelic language, which had all but disappeared from the region for decades, is seeing a revival. Highland traditions such as music, storytelling, and dance are being rediscovered and celebrated by younger generations. In Scotland, the legacies of the clearances are not only being remembered, but also being honored through memorials, historical societies, and cultural events. Many descendants of those displaced by the clearances are making pilgrimages to the lands their ancestors once lived on, reconnecting with their roots and seeking to preserve their heritage. Conclusion: reclaiming the Highland spirit. The Highland clearances stand as a tragic reminder of the fragility of community and the devastating effects of economic and political forces. But the story is not one of unrelenting despair. It is a tale of resilience, survival, and the unbreakable spirit of the Highland people. Though their lands were taken, their homes destroyed, and their communities scattered across the globe, the Highlanders' legacy lives on. Through the stories they passed down, the lands they once farmed, and the cultures they fought to preserve. As the descendants of the displaced Highlanders continue to reclaim their heritage, they remind us that the spirit of the Highlands is unyielding. Despite the loss and pain, there is strength in remembering and honoring the past, for it is through this remembrance that the true resilience of the Highland people is revealed. The story of the Highland clearances is not just one of tragedy, but also one of survival, defiance, and hope. A hope that, no matter where they may have ended up, the spirit of the Highlands will never be forgotten. And as always, remember to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. To learn more about our mission to provide innovative technology for individuals with learning disabilities and empower voices, visit www.polispeaks4u.co.za. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.